From the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum in the heart of Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Darren Sims, and today we're turning our artist spotlight on writer, editor, filmmaker, and photographer Brian Mihok. Brian's novel, The Quantum Manual Style, was published by Aqueous Books in 2013. His work has appeared in The Disconnect, Volume 1 Brooklyn, Everyday Genius, Fast Company, and elsewhere. He is also the editor and co-founder of Matchbook Literary Magazine and associate editor of Sunny Outside. As a filmmaker, Brian created Birdhouse Films to, quote, create small films and quick heartbeats, unquote. His shorts, Parachutes, and Three Trees and Three Parts were both official selections at the Inwood Film Festival, among others, and his short film, Sunspots, was selected as a grant recipient of the inaugural Inwood Film Festival Filmmaker Fund from Inwood Artworks. We're going to talk about that, his work, and so much more, but first, Brian, let me welcome you to Inwood Artworks On Air.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sure thing. So how are you and your wife doing? How's everything going?
We're doing well, as well as you can in a global pandemic, but we're both healthy, and that's good. So just trying to make it through every day, and trying to be creative when there's a lot of everyday stress in the world right now, and with the election and all that stuff, it was I haven't been as productive creatively as I would have liked to have been in a normal year, but that being said, you find little pockets.
Well, how does one measure themselves in a year of pandemic? I mean, do you really want to put yourself against something else?
No.
Yeah,
no.
I don't think it's fair.
I think you just have to do the best you can, and whatever you get, you get.
I agree. I agree. And listen, you're still here to tell the tale, so
right.
I'll call it a victory if you will.
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Okay, good.
We won.
You won. Well, speaking of safety, Brian, it's safe to observe you are an artist that wears many hats when you're not in a pandemic. You're a writer, you're a photographer, you're a filmmaker, all different, but similar in the sense and that they're all rooted in a form of storytelling. Mm-hmm. Can you share what was your gateway artistic medium and how it led you to your varied and distinguished, we'll say, hat collection of being an artist?
Yeah, sure. I guess my first identity is as a writer, as a fiction writer. I wrote stories I can remember back in grade school. I think my first, I realized that even when you don't have a lot of money, you can lean on your imagination. And so, I remember writing, I loved Looney Tunes. So I would write Looney Tunes I would write like new Looney Tunes, like just draw in the storybook form.
Was there a particular character you're writing for?
Oh, Bugs Bunny, all of them. I mean, Coyote and the Roadrunner.
Did the Coyote ever win in your versions?
No, it was. It was a rehash. I mean, let's be honest.
Okay.
But so writing early on was a big my way to express myself. And then as I got older and got more serious about learning, like, how do I do this effectively, or how do I do it, more in a better way to express myself the way I want, and worked on craft. And then eventually I did an MFA program at UMass Amherst and in fiction. And that was a great experience where I just took 4 years, and they just let weirdos be weirdos, and you just study how to be creative and do stuff. But I also got into visual arts, and my cousin and my brothers and I, we were like, what if we could make a movie? And with just because we sit around the kitchen table being weird and trying to make each other laugh. And so we like pooled our pennies and bought this little crappy camera from Circuit City, and we would write little skits and like just to make each other laugh. That's it. But things snowball, and you start being like, how come it looks like this and it doesn't look like that? And you start learning things and you piece it together. So started off as a writer, and then now I just sort of think of myself as a creative person or an artist in general, because anything can be interesting to me. And I'm sort of, whenever I see somebody doing something interesting, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I could do that. Like, I'm curious about that. But writing is sort of my first way in.
Gotcha. Well, I wish I could have read your novel because it's out of print. I understand.
It is. I can get you a copy.
Well, you know a guy?
I know a guy.
Okay. Well, since it's out of print, and congratulations on that, by the way. I guess that's some kind of like affirmation to writers saying, yes, I'm really big. You can't get it. Don't worry about it. I was relegated to reading, a few of the reviews and criticism of the Quantum Manual style. And it was interesting to me that in all of them, in some regard, mentioned that aside from the narrative structure, it had to deal with the acceptance within the substance and singularities of one's life. I mean, if I can't think of a theme for the pandemic here, I mean, I don't know. You're prophetic, but being also very familiar with your filmmaking over the years, I couldn't help but notice that the theme of acceptance, to be of oneself or one's own situation, is very much present in them as short poetic fiction pieces. And I'm just curious if this is done intentionally or something that has emerged subconsciously as part of your creative process, more than just sitting around trying to make sure life on a dinner table.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I don't know if I would have thought of it that way, but the idea of acceptance, or like, I think I tend to think of it as sort of adaptability or something, of like being able to, like, no matter, life is going to throw a bunch of things at you. Some of the things will be great and some of the things will be tragic, and they're both coming. There's nothing you can do about it. And so I think the sense of like learning how to be comfortable with yourself, and then once you sort of understand yourself to some degree, you do your best to know that life is going to throw you fastball sometimes and curveball sometimes, and in a way it's sort of like you keep yourself, like, I try not to get too excited and also not too down, but like, you still want to get excited and you still allow yourself to feel sad or down, but I try to avoid the absolute extremes, because I feel like that's where I lose myself. And so I feel like it always works itself into my work that like there's this adaptability as a human that you have to be striving for, because it's going to be great and then it's going to be terrible. And you have to be able to navigate both, because they're going to come when you don't expect it. So that's, I don't know if that's an answer to your question.
I didn't know if the question was answerable, but
that's how I interpret it.
But I just, I mean, it's because I'm always curious. Was kind of your answer is incredibly acceptable, and so thank you very much for that. We'll cash you out, but it's a process question, and I think it's, to me, what you even mentioned it too. It's like, I find the best art comes from a very personal place, and best is obviously subjective, but I found that that's most resonant for me as someone who encounters art on a minute-by-minute basis in my life. I always find that there's an incredibly personal, the way people look at life, and and whether it's a micro or macro, whether you're dealing with psychology, some kind of deep philosophy, or something very quite simple as a ladybug crossing the sidewalk and just saying, wow, that's really pretty. That's or having a adverse reaction going, oh my God, I hate bugs. Those are very telling about someone's outlook and where they happen to be at that particular time in their life at that moment in time, which is all incredibly valid. So I just think that it's really interesting to see when I see kind of things reoccurring. I just didn't know if you're grabbing at some larger questions or versions at larger questions, like Edward Albee is always writing about the baby. You
Mhm.
know, there's some things I'm just curious as
Yeah,
artists.
I mean, yeah, I guess there probably are things that I always wrestle with, and there are some things that I'm wrestling with consciously, and then there's things I'm wrestling with subconsciously that I'm not entirely. I don't realize it until later. You know, like there was a writer who talked about this too, and I forget who it was, but you know, like in my work, there always winds up. My father passed away in 2005, and he was young, and so whether I'm trying to or not, there winds up being a dead parent, dead or dying parent in a lot of my stories. But I'm not thinking like consciously like, oh, that really hit me hard, so I'm going to put that in this story. It just somehow when I look back at the stories I've written, that made its way in a lot. But it's sort of like that's sort of the stuff that wiggles its way in whether you want it to or not.
Hmm.
And then, but there's other conscious things, you know, like I do think about, you know, I don't know, the human spirit a lot, and the fact that humans are like inherently contradictory in their behavior and their ethics and their choices, and um, that I always want to I want to keep exploring that in everything that I do. Where it's sort of there's a great film called The Apostle, um, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and like um, that character to me is like the perfect example of like he's capable of horrible things that you see. But then the rest of the movie is him like helping this community and like building this church. And it's
Robert Duvall, right?
Robert Duvall.
Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote and directed and starred in it, which I don't
It was a
understand.
major piece of his work.
Totally. And I don't like, and also, and he struggled to get that movie made. I mean, he's Robert Duvall and he had to I think he actually paid for some of it himself. But, to me, that's like one of the best movies I've ever seen. Um, and at the heart of that movie is this contradiction of like how can a person, any person, be kind of a horrible monster and a beautiful saint at the same in the same person. And I think that's true for anybody. So you're at least capable of that in either direction. So I'm always sort of interested in that, sort of exploring that or shining lights through it somehow.
Well, that segues perfectly in talking about sunspots, I think, right?
Yeah.
As far as
Oh, yeah.
behavior goes. So, could you tell our listeners who have not ventured onto our website to read about you and your project, what inspired the screenplay for Sunspots?
I guess, I mean, it really is that. It was sort of like I was interested in making a film that was in some ways more of a film that you might recognize. The first two short films I made were pretty strange. And I was trying to accomplish certain artistic things for myself as an artist. But for Sunspot, I wanted to sort of branch out in terms of filmmaking and have like a character driven short film. And then when I sat down to sort of develop these characters and so that I could put them in a room together and see what they would say to each other, you know, the similar themes that I'm always writing about came out. You know, it's some people helping other people, vulnerable people being taken advantage of, a lot of stuff that's just mirrored from the world. But then at the same time, the people who are exploiting other people sometimes have their own reasons. And, you know, like if everybody thinks they're doing the right thing, who's doing the right thing? Is there a right thing? They're like, I always like that sort of Rashomon kind of, I don't know, that filter that goes over things too. So Sunspot, it's about this character River, and she's a young person in her 20s, sort of struggling, figuring out where her life is going, and she visits this old lady in her house and sort of brings her food and produce and stuff, and just sort of stops by and says hello. And River comes over one day and sees sort of one of the neighborhood lowlifes in there, and she knows that's not right, and she chases him out. And then some jewelry goes missing, and then it's sort of this thing of like I have to help this person that I help out, but at the same time, that dude isn't just like an evil person. He has his own problems that he's dealing with, and so it's sort of an exploration of who's right and who's wrong when everybody is doing something right and something wrong simultaneously. That's sort of the underlying current, I think, of Sunspot.
It's very interpretive, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think you should be able to, at least for some films, you should be able to watch a film and say, and sit down and watch it with somebody else, and then both of you say, I think that guy was totally wrong, and the other person say, I thought that guy was totally right, or whatever, and just to have and to have to both be able to point to the film and scenes in the film, like the text itself, and say, but here's my evidence for why I think it's right, or here's my evidence why I think it's wrong, and it could be the same evidence. That's always just endlessly fascinating to me.
I think so too. And so how has COVID, I'll say, and has COVID affected you in logistics of this production of creating this film?
Well, I mean, it's heartbreaking to get so close to start making a movie. No joke. The space was booked for us to do table reads, and we were like 2 weeks away. Like I was double checking the schedule and like sending out emails, be like, okay, great, we're ready to go. Let's do this thing. Like on the doorstep of production. And it just became clear that it was going to be unsafe. And it was like, a few days later, the mayor was like, no, anything is happening.
Everyone go to bed.
Yeah, everyone go to bed. You don't get dinner. So that was such a downer.
Sure.
But anyway, that's small potatoes in the grand scheme of COVID. So we've had to sort of really just go on hiatus, and we've done a few, like, I've met with a couple of the actors and done a few like visual things to just sort of just try to keep the ball rolling, because like there's a lot of pre-production stuff that we accomplished that we have to start over with, basically, you know what I mean? Like location scouting, we've lost one actor because moved to the West Coast.
Yeah.
So like there's some casting that has to get done again. So there was a hiatus, but it never went totally dormant. It's just, you just had to stretch it out and work on what you could work on. And the good thing is, you can never really get tired of reading the script and figuring out where to make it just slightly better. And then, with other pre-production stuff, you just do what you can do. And now hopefully, my hope is that, who knows, maybe in July we're making a movie.
Well, let's hope so. But it's great to hear there are some silver linings, though. So this, we'll call it a prolonged production period, has allowed you to reflect on the project a bit, though, right? Mm-hmm. And has the screenplay remained the same for the most part? For the most part, yeah. I mean, like nothing major has changed, but like there shouldn't, to me, in a short film especially, there shouldn't be a single word of wasted dialogue. So that, it's also not an artwork you could consider an artwork to never really be done. So like, I don't want to overwork it, but, it was actually nice to get some space from it, put it down and be like, okay, I'm sad about it having to go on a break, and we're not going to make this movie maybe until next year, but I'll put it down for a few months and then crack open the script again at some point. And I did. And, and just little lines here and there to try to tighten things up, and also rethink about the moments of the film that are visual, where that's not dialogue, sort of storyboarding type, that type of work. Really figure out visually what you want to say and how that will push along the script and the story. And, I wouldn't have chosen to do it this way, but who knew?
It's not all bad,
No, well, that's what I'm saying. It's like you're making the best of it, right?
Yeah.
You're making the best of it, and being a writer, it can only help you. I would think,
Yeah.
in making the story even tighter.
Exactly.
Which I think is fantastic. You have that capability and you didn't just shelve it.
No.
It's been in the crawl, and which why I'm personally excited to see it being made, because it's just the pilot light may be lower,
Yeah.
so to speak, but it is still on.
It's still on.
And it's still burning. And I think that, again, going back to what you said way early, is like, you have this, this drive, something inside of you makes you want to make something that's very personal. And I think that's, I'm personally very excited to see this film.
Me too.
And so hopefully it does get made this July. And so just to what effect, if any, did the grant from our first ever Inwood Filmmaker Fund have on the making of this film?
Well, holy crap. I mean, it's probably going to be the difference between the film being made and not being made.
Really?
Well, yeah, because I mean, so filmmaking is expensive generally. You know this. That said, you can make a film for very little money, but what you give up is control. Like, we can all write a scene right now and go down to Broadway and film it right now if we want to. We can do it. Like, it'll cost us nothing. And so that's filmmaking for free. But what is the control that we give up? Well, we give up, who's going to walk by. We give up the car that's going to decide to honk for 10 straight minutes. We give up the exact location where the store owner comes out and says, "Get out of here."
Right.
You give up that control. And so money just buys you the ability to have more control over the very instance of film, the moment at which you are making the film, to me. So this film, I do have ambition to make this film very good, at the highest level that I'm capable of making it. And I want to be very, like any artwork I make, you want to be proud of. Some more than others, you recognize at some point you're like, well, this is going to be a stepping stone for me. But I don't want to feel that way about Sunspot. I want this to be a very good film. And so I want to have, as an artist, I want to have as much control over it as I can. And so in making the budget for this, I also want to pay people if I can.
Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that. It's not going to probably be not what they're worth per se. It'll probably be, a lot of these are sort of token payments, but I think that symbolizes something.
I think we all feel that way when we're working on a project, though. We want people to pay. We want value, right?
Right.
That's important.
Right. And I want to at least say to you, look, if I want to pay somebody a couple $100, maybe they're worth way more than that, but I can say, but this is what I can afford, and we're making an art thing, and I'm not going to be making any money from this film. Who knows? But
Who knows?
I I'm going into it assuming that I won't. So. But then, the people who come and are going to work on my project, I want to be able to support as best I can. And just all the little expenses of filmmaking that come up. The grant from Inwood Artworks is going to go really far for Sunspot. I was saving my pennies as it was to try to make the film. And so, I'd say that grant probably accounts for 50% of the total budget.
Wow.
So that's considerable,
Yeah.
And makes a big difference for production costs. And, where you want to try to get locations where you have control over the location. It's going to cost a little money, maybe. Maybe, you ask nicely and, you get a good rate, maybe. But
It's just hard.
It's hard. I foolishly set 3 scenes in a diner. So
Silverware alone kills your audio.
Yeah, that's right. So, so then it's like, well, I can either say I don't want to figure out how we get a diner, then I have to change those scenes to somebody's kitchen or something.
Yeah.
But but to me, like in this film, I'm like, oh, but I want that feeling of like the town they're living in. This is like a haunt that they go to, so I want that. I also just love diners, but but I want that diner to be sort of a little character in the film. So it's like, if I have to compromise, I will, but having the money in the budget to be like, well, but maybe we can, just we can make a relationship with a diner that they'll give us a little bit, they'll give us a little bit to.
Well, we're experiencing it right now, being set here in Inwood. You have, we record these on location throughout the neighborhood, and Dyckman Farmhouse is right next to Broadway. So throughout this podcast and others, you're going to hear car radios, sirens, people yelling at each other on the street. It's New York City life, folks.
That's right.
And that's the price we pay for. Well, we don't have a home. This is literally in the ether. But
you're carrying around your magic wand, just sprinkling your magic around.
Essentially, yes. And the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum is fantastic, and we're so lucky to be here. And it's such a great cultural institution for our neighborhood. We fully recommend you checking it out, listeners, if you haven't. But whether you, unless you are, yes, you rent us. You have a soundstage available in your back pocket, great, but that's there, or would you rather put money into
right, exactly,
your an artist's pocket,
right,
or would you rather have it in that jacket you wanted her to wear in wardrobe says a lot more.
To me, one of the largest hidden costs of film that, as a small independent filmmaker, that you don't know until you start making films is food.
Oh yeah.
The cost of food, paying everybody, if you're going to have, somewhere between 10 and 20 people on set, and you're going to film for 8 days over the course of whatever, weekends and stuff, that's a lot of meals.
A lot of meals.
And, you can't, you have to provide meals. So at least that's how I'm not going to ask somebody to come spend 10 hours on a Saturday and then not feed them. You can't do that. No. So it's funny how food creeps up in terms of a percentage of the budget.
It's a large one.
Yeah.
Well, as a multifaceted artist, editor, filmmaker, other than providing the number to a great caterer, what advice can you give to writers and filmmakers out there who are trying to find ways to create and get their projects out there?
Couple of things. One would be just to keep creating, no matter what resources you have, always be working on something. Always be reading, always be, even if you're, if you run into a block in one project, try to work on something else. Just try to keep your brain going, is one, so that, whether it's something that you want to turn into a grand masterpiece, or it's just something that you're like, I've been really into doodling lately, so I'm going to just keep doodling. That's, to me, that's creative work, So always be pushing that forward some way. Or maybe if you're in sort of a fallow time, for me, my brain sort of switches from oh, I'm really getting stuff done. I'm really writing a lot, or I'm, pushing a film forward or whatever. Or I'm, I've been writing instrumentals music or something. But there are times where it's I feel like it's drying up somehow. But then I sort of move into a mode of well, maybe it's time for me to watch a bunch of new films that I've never seen, or listen to new music that I've not heard, or read new books that I've not read. And so then that's I feel like I'm filling myself up with fuel, So that's another way. And then the other, to me, is just relationships. Build relationships with people. Be nice. You'll never regret being nice and being kind and being generous to other people. I think if you're kind and generous to other people and you're creative, you've got something.
Great words to live by. No one can argue with you that, I'm sure. Well, Brian, it's been such a pleasure having you here and talking with you.
This has been great fun.
Well, thanks so much. Is there a place that people might go to learn more about your work and keep track of your upcoming projects?
BrianMihok.com.
Simple as that, folks. Very good. Well, listeners, you can find that link on our Inwood Artworks On Air episode page for this episode. So thanks again to Brian for joining me here on this Artist Spotlight episode of Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. If you have a moment, please show us some love right now by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really does help. Many thanks to Dyckman Farmhouse Museum here in Inwood, New York City for hosting us, and to heightsites.com for local uptown promotional support. You heard it all here. We were filming on location. If you'd like to help us, and as Brian said earlier, you want to give money so we can afford our own studio and we can be not on location, but perhaps create our own location in the Inwood community as our own cultural arts center, which I think is neighborhood deserves. You can support us and all our programming by making a tax-free donation at inwoodartworks.nyc/donate. You can follow us at Inwood Artworks to keep with all we do on social media channels, which includes Inwood Film Festival, Filmworks Al Fresco, pop-up art galleries, live performances, and so much more. Inwood Artworks On Air is made possible with funding from the NYC Company Foundation, with support from Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer, and the NYSCA Electronic Media Film Grant Program in partnership with Wave Farm Media Arts Assistance Fund, and the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Artworks On Air.